Hi, I'm Sarah
Yeah.
from The Upcoming. An absolute pleasure to speak to you about this film, HipBeat.
You as well. Yes, thank you.
Maybe you can just start with a little introduction for people who don't know anything about it. Just give us a taste of what they can expect.
Yes, so it's a coming of age story in the Berlin Underground, which is kind of the rave scene mixed with the community and activist scene. So the lead character, they fight the system by day, I like to say, and then they rave by night. So it's a kind of searching for self-discovery and love and anarchy in the Berlin Underground.
And it's your debut feature, and you're writing,
Yes.
directing, and starring, which is, no mean feat, let's say. So, what motivated you to want to play all those roles and to tell this very particular story?
The catalyst of the film was I had never seen a character like this, and my siblings non-binary. So I think a lot of people kind of when it comes to pronouns, they kind of might like say he, him, she, her, and they, them, but they don't actually know really what it means. I think there's a misunderstanding about what actually that person's and their kind of gender discovery is actually, and not falling within the male or female, and trying to challenging the gender norms and the rules of structure of things. And also, so my sibling was a big catalyst for inspiring me, because they were such an inspiration, because they would fight the system and literally trying to, like, for women's causes and for queer rights and women's rights and a lot of these causes that we're kind of trying to address and start a conversation about these things. And but then at the time they would love to party and rave. So I thought that was such a nice contrast, this feminine but also this masculine side that didn't fit into any box. It was more in the gray area. So that was kind of the original catalyst. And then also not seeing a character like that in film before, and kind of playing with new themes. And then the other question was, I reached out to actors at the time, but it just didn't work to availability. I didn't plan on acting in it. But coming from kind of a thespian family in theatre, I was like, well, it's easier to, for you to do it, because you'll go that extra mile, you'll put the extra work in, and everyone's so busy with their schedules, you can just work on it. And so at first it wasn't my intention to do it that way. And then it just kind of naturally manifested in me being like, well, I guess it's easier for me to do it, And plus it was such a personal story, my siblings and me and all of us being involved in the LGBTQ plus community. It felt more sense where we were working with a lot of people who were professional actors, but related somewhere on the queer spectrum, at least when the role called for it. And so it was much easier to have their trust and the trust of the city and the people that felt like they were part of the story. It wasn't about them, but they were part of telling it. And so that was a big aspect of really kind of having that authenticity, but at the same time, like staying true to where like no one was going to actually approach it in the same way with that same like blood, sweat and tears, so to speak. And so since it was so personal to my friends and my family, and a story I hadn't seen revealed that often, especially playing with like, the kind of contemporary political environment, gender and kind of relationships, and how we look at relationships and how we look at gender, and just kind of asking questions to the audience and kind of challenging them a little bit to bring in the logic, so to speak, but hopefully kind of making them maybe empathize with something of a different point of view. Because I do see a lot of people kind of go with the trend of what like their pronouns are, but I don't think anyone really knows what non-binary is, or how they think, or how they feel, or what they're actually questioning, or what they're exploring when it comes to their gender.
And it feels like the story is very much rooted in the city of Berlin. So it's not just kind of an incidental place where this is unfolding, but his kind of journey of self-discovery or exploring his identity very much happens within that queer scene in Berlin. And we're very much in those clubs, the graffitied back streets. So how important was the location and that scene to the story?
Oh, very important. I mean, one, not from an authentic standpoint, but also I think there's a mystery around these clubs that are quite exclusive, but inside of them, the people there is quite inclusive. So there's a lot of people. I didn't want the clubs to necessarily define or the reputation of what the clubs were, but the people that go there, because there's this inclusivity where you can explore your sexuality or your curiosity or experiment or your gender, and it can be a little bit more accepted. And so we're especially focusing on the femqueer community, which is a lot more female friendly and female safe, and a lot more where you can feel safe, and it's not too patriarchal, it's not too like overbearing. It's much more like, let's be inclusive, let's support each other, encourage each other. And so, because even clubs in Berlin can be a little bit, overwhelming, especially for females, with especially for queer men, or femme-queer men, sorry. And so we were exploring that world of Berlin, which was so interesting because of the inclusivity. And so those clubs were very important in reflecting a place where it's a safe space. but at the same time, it was also something that was true to the experience. A lot of these people come from other places, from all walks of life, and they can kind of feel like and felt like an outsider in some way, and felt like they could explore who they were in a place. And those clubs kind of are those safe spaces. So it was really important for their self-discovery to kind of be, in the journey where they start to open up more in these places, because it was a place where they could actually be themselves without judgment. And so it's quite important to have that aspect of the film, especially since Berlin is a city that protests one of the most in Europe, and there's always a protest about some social cause and something to bring awareness and start a conversation about it. But when it came to the clubbing, people do love to party as well. So there's that duality and that dichotomy, but where people are like, they want to just go out and fight the system or get their voices heard, but then I also just want to rave at night.
What was the process of filming in those places like? And what did you want the film to kind of look and feel like? Because it feels very much almost like a fly on the wall, I think, a lot of times. And there's the particularly poignant scenes I felt were when he goes in to speak to the drag queen in the dressing room, and then also revealing like a new get up kind of to Angie, and that scene feels like it plays out in real time. So how did you want the film to look and feel, and what do you think the effect is of that sort of realistic lens that the audience has?
Well, I guess it was also the films I grew up watching and my curiosity about the human experience and the complexity of it. But it was also something that was a big element where I wanted it to feel like you were in that world and you were observing something, but you also felt like you were watching a mirror to life itself. So we did a bit of a blending, like all the club scenes were like private parties we'd have multiple cameras go around. And then we kind of like, people would have to sign a release, or if they were the extras in the film before they could come in. And we wanted to capture those natural elements of the party scene where people weren't feeling like they were being observed, so they were just naturally in the moment, and kind of blend those organic moments with the scenes within the film between the main actors. And so it was kind of a blend of both, because I wanted to capture the kind of the natural energy that was there. And it can kind of be a little manufactured and artificial when you kind of set and you're like, just kind of naturally being like, for the club scenes, like it was like, okay, now action, and then everyone kind of does their thing for a little and cut. So we just did multiple cameras going around. We're like, we're just guys, we're going to put on some music, we're going to have some good DJs come in, like really good DJs, we just want you to party. And like we kind of just did that multiple ways to add to that authenticity, because I want people to feel like maybe they're kind of watching life, as it is, and not kind of this romanticized idea of it. Of course, there's romanticized elements, but to kind of, I thought the world was so beautiful as it was, to capture the natural moments within that, where people aren't self-conscious or aren't overthinking things. They're just in that present moment at that time. And it was also just my sensibility, I guess. I always grew up with films that were kind of from the 60s and 70s that were like these, I don't know if they were docudramas, but they were kind of these very raw elements where they add real elements of shots within like the fictional script. So like Midnight Cowboy or like Easy Rider, and a lot of these, Dog Day Afternoon, where they blend these, Mean Streets, they blend these elements together with the city and use the city as a main character. And so I wanted Berlin to be a main character, where I felt like it was a character in the film itself. So it was something that I kind of made a conscious approach in the prepping to kind of shoot all the kind of ins and outs and the different milieus and the different characters of the architecture, but also the people. And so that's why we cast so many people naturally outside of the main and supporting roles, were like people we met in the rave community or met in the activist scene. These people who really live this, and were really part of that world. It was really important to kind of have them be part of telling the story in our approach. And so, yeah, I hope that comes across, where you feel like you're really watching something happen, and you're really living through at this moment where, sometimes people have watched it and they're like, well, I don't like, is it happening or is it not? You know what I mean? And it's a blend of both, and yeah, so that's interesting you pointed that. So there was definitely a conscious fly approach on the wall, to have a fly on the wall where you can really feel like you're watching someone within this real world.
And, what do you hope that people will take away from watching it? Because kind of as you were mentioning, are we seeing enough? I feel like the sort of LGBTQ plus film scene is definitely opening up, and there's clearly an appetite for these kind of varied and nuanced stories, but it still feels like perhaps we haven't had enough of it on screen. And do you feel like what do you think the power is of cinema to enable people to have more empathy and to kind of see behind the sort of clickbaity headlines and, Twitter discussions, which feels like they just always like diminish the debate to something very polarized?
Yeah. Well, I think stories are always important, all sorts of stories. I mean, one, to, like you said, to bring empathy. I think that's really important, and kind of maybe to break down barriers, stigmas or social stigmas or stereotypes, and kind of hopefully inform people about, something maybe they haven't seen before on a human level, because, people are complex, and the LGBTQ plus section is a large spectrum of a lot of complexities and different explorations. But I think hopefully focusing also on the story of this exploration of maybe not feeling like you belong, are stories that maybe are relatable to everyone, or kind of finding yourself or trying to find a place you belong, or can be loved or accepted for who you are. But as it comes for like telling stories, there is a lot of progress being made. I think there is a lot of work to be done in that way, but it is moving in the right direction, because stories can unite people in a way that, politics or, economies or a lot of media can't do in the same way, because it's not a direct challenge to you and your ideology. It's just trying to connect you on a human level. So can tend to break down barriers. And, I always had hoped that maybe films like this, it's one thing if people can understand where you're coming from and they relate to it and they're already an ally of what you're doing. But it's also, how do you connect to people that don't see this at all, have never seen this, and how do you make people aware in a different perspective on a human level? And and that's why I think stories like this are important, because it can maybe break down this idea where people might close themselves off in a way, or stories that deal with new themes, that deal with maybe dealing with, women's rights, or women's perspectives, or queer rights, or Black lives, or different perspectives, marginalized groups. It can maybe break down these barriers that are that are overlooked and kind of disregarded very quickly, and just go straight to the human level, where you can make someone feel the same feeling they might see themselves. And that, I think, can make real progress in a positive way. But I think there is a lot of work to be done. But I think people's curiosity and urge for something different is out there. And I think everyone should just keep telling their stories, and so I think it's moving in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
I think also what's interesting in the film is that it's like, it kind of shows the messiness often of trying to find your identity, that, it's not always a kind of a neat arc between sort of feeling lost and then finding yourself. And also going on that journey obviously has self-destructive elements to it, or it might affect the people around you. And I think that is kind of the nuance sometimes that can be missing. So is that also something that you really wanted to capture?
Oh, completely. The complexity, because life is a messiness, life is kind of designed for things to go wrong in some way, it's like, how do you overcome and improve them? So I think that is definitely part of the dichotomy of the character and kind of the story is trying to bring up there. Sometimes you get in your own way from your own best interest, and you do that because, maybe we accept the love we feel we deserve, or multiple things where you're not comfortable, and, it's hard to be vulnerable. So he's constantly going through this messiness where he also puts himself in that messiness. I think that is kind of a human trait sometimes, sometimes we do get in our own way more than anything. But it's not really a plot-driven film, it's more of a character-driven film. So it deals much more with the dichotomy and the complexity of the person on their journey of self-discovery, which is not necessarily how you see most structures of films talk, because they're very plot-driven. And this one's a character-driven film, which I think some people don't quite understand, because they're like, we're so used to just being plot-driven, plot-driven. But I love the human condition and the experience and the complexity of this person, how one moment they really desire this or want this, and then the next moment they do everything to not get it. And I think that is part of the messiness of life, part of the learning. And as long as you kind of learn from that, no regrets, lessons learned, then you're not making the same mistakes. So he's constantly trying to become more comfortable with himself, or they are trying to become more comfortable with themselves. And as they do, they start to kind of feel this personal revolution. And the film deals more about the personal revolution, where it goes from this macro idea of it to more about finding your own inner personal revolution, whatever that may be, if that makes sense.
And didn't you also get arrested in the?
Yeah, we did actually. So it wasn't planned. We went down because, we made the film for a very shoestring budget. So you have to, find moments that you need in the script that you might not be able to afford financially. So, a very underground filmmaking. And so we went to this protest. May 1st is a protest that is notorious since the late 1800s. It was kind of a workers' protest, but it was against an anti-fascist protest, really even way before World War I. And it was started in Europe, but very much in Berlin. and there was a lot of conflict between the, you know, the police and the far right and protests and things that were happening, and you know, and the left. And so we wanted to go shoot this because it had this history, and everyone always says something kicks off, and in the beginning of the film it starts in a riot and ends in the film in a love protest to kind of show the transition of, you know, love, hate incites hate and love incites love. And so it was this journey where when we went there, we were with the cast and crew, we had 2 cameras, and I was like, I was dressed up in the outfit, I was looking like I was raw, you know, playing this anarchist. So everyone's like, and back at the time, this is quite ironic, it was illegal to go to a protest and wear a mask, at least in Germany, which is really ironic because now it's illegal to go to a protest and not wear a mask. And so it's kind of funny in that way. And so it was illegal, which I didn't know about this. No one on the team and no one, we had one of the police commissioners helping on the film who spoke a little English, so he never told us this. And so he helped us get all these like shots of the police and behind the scenes shots. But once the protest started, I was just like in the front of it. And when I was in the front of it, we just kind of went for it. And like I had the mask on. And so then it just became like, this guy looks like he's up to no good. And they didn't know we were filming. And it was so chaotic between the police and between the protesters. And I was right in the middle of it. They just came for me and they were like, no, we're going to take it out on this guy. He's here for no good, you know. But in the long run, everything worked out and it was fine. It was a misunderstanding, you know, but at least, you know, I'm happy in the sense that it was raw and real and got to really kind of reflect that moment of what it's like really at the front lines and how, you know, there can be a lot of people who overstep and abuse their power, you know.
Well, I think I'm out of time, but can you quickly tell us what you're going to work on next? Are you going to be also playing all these different roles? Are you going to stick to directing or?
No. This next one I'm just directing, and I co-wrote it with a friend of mine from Guinea-Bissau, who's European and American and African. So it's a European and African production. And we shot it half in about 25% in Europe and 75% in Africa. So we're planning on releasing it in the summertime. It's and so stay posted for that. And it's about a brother and sister who return home to reconnect with their father and their family they haven't seen in 17 years. So it's a kind of family drama, but mostly more about family and kind of, you know, I guess all my films kind of deal with some form of embracing love, just different forms of it. So the other one was self-love and this one's more embracing love of family. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with us.
Thank you so much for your time, Sarah. And I really appreciate it. And thank you for your kind words and have a beautiful day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks, Samuel. Bye.